My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United and Learning Program for the General Council of the United Church. And it's a privilege and a delight to be able to connect folks from both of our denominations into this important conversation. It really is exciting to see us talking this way together and to talk this way on a national level. So thank you. Thank you for giving up your evening for this. Thank you for coming to share your experience and to bring your questions and to explore this important and exciting way of being church together. But now I'm going to turn things over to Scott, who is one of our presenters tonight. Scott, it's great to have you here. Maybe before you begin, you can even tell us kind of who you are and what brings you into this conversation, and maybe even where you're sitting tonight.
Yes, I will do that. So my name's Scott Sherman, and I'm connecting from Treaty 6 territory in the city of Edmonton. And I'm a priest in the Anglican Diocese of Edmonton, and I also serve with the General Synod of the Anglican Church of Canada in a role that's called Animator for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations. And so in that role, I get to work closely alongside of United Church colleagues and colleagues from many other church traditions to try to facilitate learning and understanding and cooperation and partnership. And so that's what brings me into the conversation this evening. And thank you to all of you for what you bring as well. We'll have a chance to introduce our other presenters and then a chance to do some interaction and sharing all together a little bit later on in our agenda. We're calling this webinar Daring to Share What You Need to Know about Anglican-United Ecumenical Shared Ministry. And we'll jump into that content in just a second, but let me turn it over to my other colleagues who are giving leadership to the content this evening to introduce themselves as well. And then I'll say a bit about how the rest of the time will unfold and some of the different components that will be part of our time together. So perhaps over to Sandra to say hello.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be together with you. I'm also on Treaty 6 territory, but in Saskatoon on the South Saskatchewan River, and delighted to connect with you. I've been involved with shared ministries for many years. I served the Anglican-United Church Ministry in Churchill Falls, Labrador, back in the 1990s, but then took a real interest in helping to promote and encourage and find out more about shared ministries across Canada over a number of the last few decades. I served with Andrew and Scott on the Anglican-United Church Dialogue that produced some documents, including one that encourages people to look at shared ministries. And so I'm just really pleased to be able to help tonight to hear from you and talk with you about some of the possibilities around shared ministry.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Richardson, and I'm in Prince Edward Island. And I'm the Minister for the Office of Vocation. So I work for the United Church, and my responsibility is oversight of clergy and working with our students for ministry in the Atlantic area. So from Newfoundland through to Bermuda, up to the Gaspé and everything in between. And I also served, as Sandra said, on the Anglican United Church Dialogue. And that's one of the things that we wanted to do is promote ecumenical shared ministries. And so we get a chance to do that with you folks. So looking forward to being with you.
Wonderful, thank you both. And so just quickly, the webinar is going to unfold in kind of three main movements. The first two of those will be a bit more informational, and we'll present some slides and some content and talk about those. And then the third will be a bit more conversational and interactive, and we'll have some chance for questions and comments from all of you. In part one, we're going to start talking about what ecumenical shared ministry is and why people in churches might be interested in exploring it. The second part is going to go into some of the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of how to get started, and some of the important steps to keep in mind as you're getting underway. And then finally, in part 3, we're going to address some of the gifts and the opportunities, as well as the challenges that come with this particular way of being disciples of Jesus together. And so in that third section, there'll be some chance for comments and questions from all of you as well. And as Stephen mentioned before, there'll be some moments through the other parts where we'll show a few video clips, and there'll be chances for you to respond or put questions in the chat as we go along. So we'll try our best to keep it relatively interactive and some different forms of engaging, and pick those up as we move along with what you comment in the chat. So be sure to share those as things occur to you, and we'll try to come back to them as time allows. I'm going to pass it again back to Andrew, who's going to acknowledge the lands and the relations that we all bring to this evening from where we're connecting from, and then Sandra, who will open our time with a prayer.
Great, thanks, Scott. I want to begin by acknowledging that I live and work on the territory of the Mi'kmaq people of Abogwait, which is the Mi'kmaq word for Prince Edward Island. And the larger territory of that Indigenous people is Mi'kmaqi. And we want to acknowledge that Mi'kmaqi is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, who in 1725 signed the treaties of peace and friendship with the British Crown. And these treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands and resources, but instead recognized Mi'kmaq title and negotiated a path toward an ongoing relationship between nations. And so I acknowledge that I carry out my daily work here in Mi'kmaqi, and you may want to put in the chat the territory that you reside on. And as a group, we do these land acknowledgements to convey our respect to all Indigenous peoples living across the country, to the knowledge keepers and to their brave and resilient leaders past and present. And we acknowledge that to be the church here in Canada or Turtle Island is to recognize the injustice that lies at the base of the place where we live and work. And then, and only then, together, we can move toward a path of reconciliation. So as those are coming up, I'll turn it back over to Sandra.
Thank you. And it's always really moving to see how many treaty lands and non-ceded lands we are on, and to remember and honor that heritage and also that current reality that we share. And indeed, today, this afternoon, this evening, later in the evening, we all have so many things on our hearts, don't we? Violence and suffering in the world, lingering pandemic. Today, we're thinking about the gifts and aspirations of women around the world on this International Women's Day. We are thinking about the life and health of our communities and of those we love. And today, we remember that we also live in divisions of one form or another from one another as Christians. And so, gathering all the things on our hearts and borrowing some words from Lydia Smith, who leads us in worship in the United Church of Canada. I've woven a prayer using some of her language. So we pray. God of life, we are thankful for the opportunity to be together on this pilgrimage of faith and witness, a journey that is not measured so much in distance as in transformation, as in new stories. As we travel together today, God, provide us with the humility, wisdom, and grace we need to deepen our understanding of what it means to be the church in our time and place. May we continue to follow in the way you are leading with hopeful and daring hearts until we have reached your commonwealth of love, justice, and peace for all. And so in this time of gathering, we pray in the name of Jesus, who longs to gather us in his tender care. Amen. that takes us into the first part of our time together. So we'll look at our first, and Steve is graciously forwarding the slides for us. So you'll hear me say next, and that's what that's about. So as Scott mentioned, we're starting with just a kind of overview of what we are sharing and why. And to do that, we're going to, in a minute, introduce some ecumenical shared ministries and why they got together, both in video and then with a couple of more that we'll present to you. So next slide then, please. So what is an ecumenical shared ministry? Well, we're lucky that we in Canada, unlike many places, have an ecumenical shared ministries handbook that churches have put together. The Anglican-United, Lutheran, and Presbyterian churches worked together to create this handbook out of some work that was done in Alberta in the 1980s and 90s, where they created their own handbook for shared ministries, and then it became a national handbook. And they define an ecumenical shared ministry as people worshiping and serving God in a unified way while still maintaining their denominational identity and connections. And that's important because it means that it isn't the same as kind of amalgamating into one community ministry. It means continuing to be actively connected to your own denomination as you share in various kinds of ministry. So the next part of the slide, please, will show us what people share together. 2 or more denominations, and in our case, we're talking specifically about mostly about congregational sharing tonight. I know there are many shared chaplaincies and other ministries, but we're going to focus on congregational or community of faith ministry. So they're sharing any at least one of worship, ministry personnel, buildings or a building, program, and or outreach. So there's no one definition, but those are the things that they might be sharing at any time. We'll look at the next slide. And well, they operate, yes, within a covenant that they've shaped under the oversight of their. And here's one of your $64 words for the evening: judicatories. That's the word we use to describe the people that give oversight to our ministries, because in the different denominations they have different names. So in the United Church, the people in the region who offer oversight, and in the Anglican Church, the diocesan oversight. And we're going to talk more about that later, but that's generally how shared ministries come together. So they also come with an agreement, a covenant that they've worked out together. And now to the next slide. Now, I have the tendency to want to talk forever about the fascinating history of shared ministries in Canada, but I won't do that for you tonight. You can get in touch if you want to know more. But I will mention that shared ministries have been around in a formal way in Canada since the late 1950s, and the two primary or the two original denominations that did most of the sharing were Anglican and United. And we are privileged tonight to have with us today, in our webinar, Phyllis Smythe, who is one of the first ministers to serve in a shared ministry. And Phyllis served in shared ministry in Quebec, and she's on with us this evening. So thank you, Phyllis, for joining us and testifying to the long history we share. And this is a rough approximation, just what we think, because the numbers do tend to shift a little bit over years, but roughly we have roughly 109 shared ministries in Canada, in which the Anglican Church shares in 92 or 83% of them. So the Anglicans win the prize for being the most sharing of any of us, partly because they have a shared the long history with the United Church, and then they also have the Anglicans have a full communion agreement with the Lutheran Church, so they have shared ministries in many directions. Anglican, United, and you can see there, Lutherans also share in a large number for their smaller size of their denomination, and then others in smaller numbers. And so we're going to talk mainly about Anglican-United tonight, or today. I keep saying tonight, today, but you'll see that there are other partners that operate in different parts of the country, sometimes in more numbers. So now we're going to show you a video that will introduce you to some live human beings engaged in ecumenical shared ministry. And then we'll talk a little bit about that.
What would it look like if we invited this bilingual United Church of Canada minister into St. Michael's Anglican Church, Église Anglicane St. Michael de Sillery at Quebec, and invite her to preside at Holy Communion every Sunday or every other Sunday, using a communion, a liturgical rite of the United Church of Canada, which everyone would be invited to participate in according to their conscience. We talked it over, thought it over, prayed over it, and realized there's no reason not to try this and every reason to try it. And so the congregation was, of course, consulted. They were fully on board because they knew this person and trusted this person. I happen to know this person very well because she and I attended an ecumenical seminary together. And so we'd known each other for years and remained friends and colleagues. So we trusted each other. And we did that for about a year. And, we were able to do it in part because the liturgical renewal movement over the last century or so has helped reveal just how much in common we have as churches in so many ways, including liturgically. And it worked. And it became even more than we intended. It was kind of like, how can we make this work? And then at the end of it, we realized, wow, this is a really unintended sign and symbol of the church's visible unity, more than we had ever intended it to be. And we realized even more, just how much in common we have as sister churches.
And we're not doing anything in person, but we've been doing messy church bags to deliver to family. And so it's been great to have this young person from the Anglicans who's got some gifts and skills in that area. And then the Lutherans have an intern who has done some youth ministry and stuff. So all three of us are like working together, who've had experience with creative work and stuff. And so that's been really great. And it's a great opportunity for us to offer family ministry programming in a way that is outside of Sunday morning, in a way that would attract families who wouldn't otherwise come, as well as, like, we get lots of grandparents bringing their grandchildren. So it's quite a wonderful opportunity and benefit of, again, being together and working together.
In the Fernie, not United and Anglican situation, when we entered the covenant, our agreement was just really to share the minister. We both have historic buildings, and feelings were very strong about keeping those off the table. And it was agreed that we would have worship at United Church and also at the Anglican Church. COVID hit, and of course, all of us had to change, be able to change. And I think the fact that we had said we're going to share Reverend Andrea allowed us the chance when she said, we're going to do online worship. She was wonderful. And we're going to do it together. We all said, okay, and so that was a gift to be able to step into that pretty easily, actually, at that point. And then a year and a half later, to be at a point where now we have a combined service where Andrea has some Anglican elements and some United Church elements. It varies from week to week, and we sort of roll with the punches.
So for me, it's an example of just how important things like ecumenical friendships are, and getting to know each other in so many different ways, because it was those relationships that existed before this problem appeared that allowed us to see a way forward very easily. And I think that's what the Holy Spirit's about, is being operative and all of that every step of the way.
Thank you for that, Steve, for playing the video. Just before we move on to talk about some more shared ministries, I will introduce a couple more to you. But does anybody want to share in the chat anything you noticed or anything that struck you as you heard those people describing their formation stories, how their shared ministries came together? Anything hit you that you'd like others to hear? If not, flexibility, yeah, for sure. People had to express joy of serving together. Got the stats. Oh, flying along here. Sorry, I just missed who was in the shared ministry. Jane, you've been in the shared ministry since 1978. That's wonderful. Maybe you could add to the chat which one that is. Collegiality. COVID has been the very best thing. There's Andrea, right? Didn't expect that, right? Yeah. And you're in Ignace. Oh, great. I've never visited that shared ministry, and I'd love to go sometime. So there's a long-standing one, and Jean can be a resource for us all. Okay, we're always welcome. Great. Okay. And yes, and Phyllis started in 1968 in her shared ministry, right, in Quebec. Wonderful. Having exposure to ministry people, that's right, especially of the other denomination, and making, those connections beforehand, right? Yes, the Toronto Urban Native Ministry is a very exciting ministry of the United and Anglican churches in the heart of Toronto. Yes, thank you. Right, be fun to be able to say a little more about that. Well, maybe we'll move, just to keep us moving. We'll move on to just to introduce a couple more to you. And one of them is one of Canada's oldest and longest shared ministries, but you've already recognized there are some more here. So Windermere Valley in British Columbia was formed as a shared ministry in 1965, and I always like to say this, on a trial basis. So they weren't sure at the beginning, but they said there was an Anglican and a United Church in Windermere, in Invermere itself, and then there were some small rural points around it, and so they called themselves the Windermere Valley Shared Ministry. It took them a while, but by 1991, they felt like they were ready to share one building in Invermere. And so they sold property to build one church together, and they continued to serve the smaller points as well. They worship with, we're going to come back to this later, but they worship with what they call a blended ministry, blended liturgy, where it has some elements of Anglican and some of United with the approval of their bishop. We'll talk a little more about that later. And on their 50th anniversary, they celebrated with both the primate of the Anglican Church of Canada, who was Fred Hiltz at the time, and the moderator of the United Church of Canada, who was Jordan Cantwell, both there helping them celebrate with their liturgy of celebration. So that's just an example of one that's lasted a long time, and yet they found that it took them a while to completely gel into that the fullness of their ministry together. Next slide. So here's a rural one in Turtle River Parish, Saskatchewan. It was created in 1970 as a shared larger parish, and larger parishes were developed in different parts of the country, often shared between Anglican and United churches. Sometimes they were developed just in one denomination. And your old parish, that's wonderful. And the idea was there that they would have an Anglican United clergy team to serve a number of communities. So in this case, 7 communities, 7 churches, 3 Anglican and 4 United. Now that has with some of the changes in rural places, next bullet point there, they now serve 5 communities. They still manage to have their 2 clergy, but both are at 3/4 time, and they also make use of lay worship leaders. And so Reverend Kun Kim there at the top is United Church. That's his spouse with him, and I don't have her name. And then Reverend Donald Skinner is the Anglican minister there. And so I guess one of the questions we might ask ourselves is the ecumenical larger parish an idea whose time may have come again? And that would be the next point on our slide there. Is that a way to go to try to cover, territory that otherwise might be unserved by clergy personnel? So these are some examples of shared ministries, and just a few. And we've got some people with us who represent more of them, and it'd be wonderful to be able to just sit around and hear all their good stories. But I hope those of you who are involved will. Nipawa has been sharing since 2020, more things in common than not. That's a good sign too. We're going to show you another video now featuring some of the same people and some new people who are going to tell you a little bit about why they did it. Why does it matter, and why did they get involved?
I do see it as one way to live into the vision Jesus gives us in John's Gospel when he says that they may all be one.
Basically, Jesus tells us to. The head of the church has kind of left this to us as a kind of foundational aspect of what it means to be church.
In God's love, everybody is equal, and more importantly, loved by God as we are. And together, as the body of Christ, we can be stronger, I think, if we work together. And move past our denominational sort of traditions and things that we love, and really focus in on what is it that Christ asks us to do to follow him.
So the more that we can do together, the better we will be, the richer our lives will be, and the more meaningful it will be for those who aren't as connected to the church, because the denominations don't really mean anything to them. And there's a lot of people who are spiritual but not religious. They want to be part of an institution. So the less we're kind of connected to institutions, the more likely we are to appeal, to draw in those for whom church hasn't been an experience, but exploring faith and spirituality is important too.
Shared ministry offers this opportunity to continue the ministry, but from a strong base. And I think that's why it can matter, is because the ministry that they do, and they often find this as they start to be in more conversation with each other, they share so many values and a deep connection to wanting to serve their communities. And then in their struggle, they've not been able to see how to do that. Once they start having these conversations, it just opens up some new possibilities. I get really excited with them.
Very difficult to call or to ask a minister to come to a small town and not give them a full-time job. And so this was a practical step forward from our congregational point of view, but also from the minister's point of view. She was quite glad, I think, that we said, okay, let's have a conversation about this.
On a practical level, I see it as a way to allow a Christian presence to remain in small communities, and it can allow for the ministry of small, strong congregations to continue.
And ecumenical shared ministries are probably one of the most on-the-ground visible manifestations of the church's unity you can find, because they're very practical. And so that's another important reason that ESMs are important, because we just know from a very practical standpoint that dividing our resources needlessly and continuing to exist in these silos, in this case ecclesiastical silos, just kind of drains resources and energy and capacity, when we could just bring those things together for the church's life and work and witness in the world.
Okay. So did anybody notice anything in that video that you'd like to comment on in the chat? Why they do it? Anything that pops into your head you'd like to share? Okay, well, while you're thinking about that, we might move on. Viability in rural communities for sure. Absolutely. Spiritual and practical. Necessity, called to live in unity. Yeah, to make sure there's ministry in rural areas. Absolutely. Yes. Similar to our reasons, you could not have church on your own. There wouldn't be one. That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's great. Well, we'll look at the next slide now, and you'll see that some of those ideas are indeed part of what people tend to say. Greater presence in the community for outreach. Absolutely, yes. So I conducted a survey a few years ago of shared ministries across Canada and tried to get as many of them as I could to respond. And I asked why you tried. What are the factors? What were the factors in the formation of your shared ministry? So first off was practical and financial necessity. It was very important or somewhat important to everybody, right? So it's clear that there's no way around it. The need for resources can be right at the heart of the desire to share. And yet, look at the next most important thing. Oops, just a sec, can we go back? Yeah, important to everybody, almost everybody, either very important or somewhat, and almost everybody said the desire to provide a more unified witness in the community. And so some of you mentioned that, the strength of what you can be in the community when you're together. And yes, Sarah, Sorrento since 1971, and you love being a shared ministry. Thanks, Heather, that's wonderful. And the next slide just shows some more reasons. For some, there was and again, most people said they also wanted to get to know each other better as Christians. Often in communities, they might know each other in every other way and then divide on Sunday. So it's a way to get to know your neighbor. And finally, and people have, that you saw it in the videos, and then people mentioned that in the chat, the opportunity to share programs. So for some, that's the key in the ticket: Sunday school, youth group, messy church, outreach of some kind. And so those are the main reasons that people do form. Those are the main factors in ecumenical shared ministry formation. And so that sort of gives you the overview of where they come from and what they look like. Now we're going to move to part 2, and Andrew's going to start us off with the next part, where we look at what we call the mechanics of sharing.
Yeah. So we promised you nuts and bolts. So we're going to get into that now, and just want to recognize that we have with us today a wide variety of situations and folks. So we have folks who've been at shared ministry for a long time and who just want to be with other folks who are thinking about it and kind of form a community of ESMs. And then we have, I think, probably people who are just wondering if this is for them. And so I'm going to start at the very beginning. And Steve, if you could put up the slide for me, please. The next one. So how do we get started? Okay, and this is, in some ways, this is the most important question, clearly. But it's also, in some of the folks that I've talked to, they have thought about it. They may have even had a conversation at a board level or a parking lot conversation. Wouldn't it be great if we could? And then that's as far as it goes. So in order to get started, you have to decide that you want to do it. And I teach missional theology. And so I always hope that ecumenical shared ministries would come out of a sense of mission, a sense, and we heard some of the folks in the slides talk about that just a heart and desire to work ecumenically in your communities. And so that may be something that is talked about at your in your congregation, or you as a clergy leader or lay leader might have that as an important part of things. The reality is often quite different. Often these things get started out of necessity. So something happens. A church, your building is condemned, or your building is no longer usable, and you need to kind of think about what else you're going to do. Can I have the next slide, please? There we go. So where typically a good place to start is to assess the needs for ministry in your community and in your own congregation. And so that means two things. One is to look at yourself as a congregation honestly, and say, okay, what's our future here? What's our energy, our capacity, our human resources for the future? And some of it is looking at the wider community. What ministry is out there that is untapped, that needs to be done? What are the things that a church ought to be about? And so you ask those questions of yourself, and then you can start to ask, in what ways could we meet these needs by working with others? And that's already been noted in the chat numerous times. You get a lot farther when you can share resources. And resources can mean a lot of things, right? I mean, it can be worship space, it could be volunteers, it could be sharing in prayer. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to share resources. But it starts with need. Okay, it's having that conversation in your own congregation, and then thinking about who are your natural ecumenical partners where you live. So not every community has a multitude of churches. So you may be limited in terms of who your ecumenical partners might be, or you might want to think a little broader. You may have had someone mentioned that they already had familiarity with some other clergy from another denomination. So that gives you a natural relationship. Many of the clergy here tonight might belong to ministerial groups, and there might be a clergy person that you've talked to before that you really sort of hit it off with and kind of share a vision of what ministry is. And it is important, I think, to have partners who you would be comfortable with in terms of theology, in terms of worship styles and all of that. I mean, some of that can be overcome, but it's a lot easier to work with people who are you have affinity with. So map that out in your community as you start that conversation. Who are the natural partners? And then invite them to join a discussion. Now, I don't recommend calling your ecumenical, your neighboring clergy person for coffee and saying, how would you like to join our church? You want to have a more organic and slower conversation. How can we share? How can we do things together? And what permissions do we need to seek in our own congregation? And how can we test that with our boards or something like that? And so you start at a kind of relational level, and then you can perhaps move into maybe the two governing bodies can have some conversation together. Have someone facilitate from the outside, facilitate a conversation between the two groups. And think about possibilities. Like don't automatically leap to the conclusion that you're going to close one of your churches and be one congregation, although that might be where you end up. Like start slowly, start working, building a list of things that you can begin to do together, and then start with the main issue. Like, is it money that's the issue for your congregation? Is it an aging congregation. The Anglican Church has a Sunday school and your church doesn't, or is your building no longer adequate and the other church might have a better building, or you could combine space and have something better. Be honest again about what your actual issues are. So if your issue is survival, be upfront about that. Like, we want to survive and we want to be a Christian presence where we are, but we're fading fast, and we want to be with another church so that that presence continues. And most ESMs start small. They really do. They start with casual conversations, building of relationships, deepening of trust, and then moving into doing some things together. And quite often, you start by deciding, well, let's try something together. Let's see if we can get along, see where this leads us. Let's get used to working with each other. And that could be something like a shared mission project, a shared fundraiser for something in particular, a shared prayer service, worship service. A perfect example might be a shared service for Ukraine, for example, where you would come together and plan it out together and be together in worship to get a kind of feel for each other. And then come back again and say, well, how was that? How did that feel? Like, was that what we thought it was going to be? And then do some more things together and keep on moving in that direction. Tonight, this group is primarily, I think, Anglicans and United Church, but there are other partners in Ecumenical Shared Ministries, Lutherans, a couple of Baptists in the Maritimes, at least, have worked with the United Churches. So I mean, look around and see if it's good with two, maybe it's better with three. And my guess is the Presbyterians, another major group that we have ESMs with. My sense is that all of us as denominations are struggling post-Christendom. So, and post-COVID, it's going to be an even greater struggle. And it's going to be an even greater need, I think, to work ecumenically. And if your United Church or your Anglican Church is struggling, then you can rest assured that the United Church or your sister church is also struggling. And it just takes a little courage to reach out to another church community and say, having a Christian presence in our community is really crucial. We can't do it by ourselves. So how can we do it together? And it's just from those lively and fresh and sincere conversations that the Ecumenical Shared Ministries can grow. Let me just stop there for a minute and see from you and from those churches who've had experience, how did you get started? Yeah, so people to people rather than clergy to clergy. That's often the way it starts. Clergy can be guarded and not be as keen, but sometimes the lay folk can see what really needs to happen. What else? What are some of the things that you would suggest as starting steps, or for those who have been at this a while, how did you get started? For those of you who are here out of curiosity and sort of at the very beginning stage, how how might you get started? What might you do? Curcio? So that's a kind of a spiritual program that you could run together. Ellen says we're in the process. We're going to do fundraising together at a few planned services. Board to board, a very important step, I think. You have to get your governing group on board. Toronto Urban Native Ministry in 1996 had started in 86 and have 8,000 lives that they've interacted with. Clergy having initial fundraisers, shared interest in music. So there's a group, Alwyn says that they've just approved their shared ministry agreement, waiting for the next step. Fabulous. My sense of ecumenism is it's been a bit dormant for a while as we all looked inward. And I think now we're starting to realize the richness that's around us. Many congregations are starting to have these kinds of conversations that some of you are having. A shared interest in social justice. So either a community-related justice issue or a national one. Do some work together on it. Women's groups, Iroquois Falls, racism, homelessness. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that go beyond our ecumenical fences. Great, there's a lot of energy already on some of these things. Food banks, yeah, so an ecumenical food bank. It's a great thing to be about. So special services, so on a particular occasion to worship together. I know lots of congregations have shared ecumenical services on Good Friday, for example, or through the Holy Week or over Christmas. So you can build on those things. The main point is to start. Like it's if you have this idea, chances are the church down the road has a similar idea. And it really is taking the courage to take the first step. Just start the conversation, reach out and test. May not work out, but you won't know until you do it. So the ideas are keep coming here. Lent and Advent Bible studies. Lots of groups have shared really good Bible study together. Great. Well, I think I'll turn it over to Scott. He's going to take this a little bit farther as we get a little deeper into the mechanics of sharing.
Thank you, Andrew. And thanks for all those examples in the chat of some of the first kinds of steps and the sharing at the program level and ministry level outreach, some of those kinds of really good stuff. This next little bit of time is then what? It's maybe second steps or third steps or something like that. If you want to go a bit further and you're talking about sharing things like buildings or ministry staff and some of those things, how do you continue that growth together? And I just want to touch on a few practical things under that heading. First of those is, Sandra mentioned that word earlier on, that is there on the screen again, judicatories. And these are the oversight and authority structures that each of our two churches have. And it's important that these conversations happen in good communication and collaboration between the local and the regional and the grassroots and those who have positions of office and oversight. And so first step is kind of just knowing even who those are. Sometimes that's a a bit of a mystery to each other because we have different titles, we have different systems of polity. So just knowing who the opposite number judicatory is and where you would go to call and how you begin that conversation. So of course, for Anglicans, that's especially diocesan bishops and their offices, sometimes other folks that work in those offices with the bishop, such as archdeacons and people in those kinds of roles. On the United Church side, often in the regional councils, the main person that you might start with would be the pastoral relations staff for your particular area. And I think depending on what kind of sharing you're talking about, it might also call upon somebody like Andrew, who is with the Office of Vocation, if you're talking about sharing a minister or something like that. So you can find lists of those people who have those roles, those offices, on the unitedchurch.ca and Anglican.ca websites. So I encourage you to look those up and know who those people are. And we mention that just because sometimes ESMs form because judicatory folks encourage them and they suggest it, but most often I think they begin from the ground up. They begin at the grassroots, and we've heard that a little bit of people who know each other, who've been doing things together for a long time, who begin calling this vision forth and wanting to explore it further. And that's good. I think that's often how the Spirit of God has moved the church into new kinds of things. And so that's great that it begins there, but we had a version of this webinar. This one is focused on local congregational leaders. We had a version of it where we offered this to folks who have those judicatory positions in our church as well. And one of the things that they said is it helps if we hear about that interest early on and that we know about it and that we can walk together in exploring it so that we can perhaps avoid some pitfalls and just make sure that we are working well together. So that's a first step is make sure that the judicatory bodies are involved in these conversations and can help point out some of the practical things that need to be thought through. So the next slide. Yeah, their support is crucial. Another piece is a tangible resource that you can maybe have as a bit of a map. And again, Sandra mentioned this early on as well, and some of you may already know this document pretty well if you're a fair bit down the road with shared ministry, others maybe not. The Ecumenical Shared Ministries Handbook is, I think, an invaluable resource for folks who are particularly just getting started in exploring these kinds of conversations. It's a practical guide, and it does some things just like basic definitions of what sharing is and what kinds of sharing can be done. It talks about some of the differences in governance structures and polity so that you can know how to navigate around those. It talks about some of the questions that we sometimes have about liturgies and who can do what in each other's systems and what books are there. And, even there's a helpful glossary of terms. What is an archdeacon or a canon, or what is a pastoral relations officer, and what are their areas of oversight, so that we can understand each other. It's a bit like learning another language. And the handbook is a really good tool that gives some suggestions for how to get started and things to keep in mind. And so in registering for this webinar, I think you will have received or will receive a copy of the Ecumenical Shared Ministries Handbook in a PDF. You can also find those on the denominational website. So if you don't have that already and you're wondering where to go and what some of the next steps might be, it might have some answers for you. So make sure you dig into that. Next slide. Third thing I wanted to point to, and this is as things maybe get a little bit further along, somebody mentioned, I saw that they just finished working out their Ecumenical Shared Ministry agreement. And this would be an important kind of high watermark in growth together in Ecumenical Shared Ministry when you get to the point of being able to articulate a kind of covenant for how you are going to be church together. And so once you've done some of those early steps of judicatory connections and familiarizing yourself with some of the stuff in the Ecumenical Shared Ministry Handbook, an important step was developing kind of an agreement for what and how you are going to be church together. And some governance structures in some churches actually require this as part of their rules and regulations. Others don't. But even if you don't, it's a good idea. As it is with most things, it's a good idea to have a shared sense of expectations and to be on the same page before you start out on a new road together. So you'll find in some of the documents and resources reference to how to develop a shared ministry agreement or a shared ministry covenant. Now, it would be great if there was an existing template that all you had to do was change the name of the churches involved and it would work everywhere. But that's not really the case. Every ministry context is a bit different, and every kind of sharing is probably a bit different. And so most often, local congregations and groups of people work these out together according to their context, according to their realities, their hopes, their needs. And so in the handbook itself, there is an appendix that talks a little bit about some of the things that are commonly spelled out in a shared ministry agreement. You can see some of the bullet points there on the slide, and they give suggestions for things that you can include there. And I'm realizing too, we have a number of people who've already probably done this, who are in this on the call tonight, who maybe would be willing to share theirs as an example. And that can be a really helpful way. You don't have to start from scratch entirely or completely reinvent the wheel, but drawing on some of those existing resources. And so if that's something that you're exploring in your own context, we can probably put you in touch with somebody who's not that far away from you, who might be able to share their template, and that you could adapt that based on your context. So those are a few of the next steps, the then whats, that go a bit further. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Sandra.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I saw a few little things in the chat there. In terms of teaching, I did teach when I was teaching at a theological school in Saskatchewan at St. Andrews. I did teach a course in preparing for ecumenical ministries, and that was. But I don't know of other courses similar around the country, and that's partly why we want to do these kinds of things. I would add, though, as part of that I do have examples of covenants that shared ministries have made. So I think you'll have our contact information, Scott and Andrew and me, and I know we're all willing to be contacted with any kind of question you might have, and maybe can direct you to things. And I can certainly send PDF copies of shared ministry agreements if people want to look at one just see what somebody else has done. As Scott says, it's a little bit like everyone is going to be special because it's yours, but it's nice to have some templates. And so we'll move on to the final piece here, and this is kind of taking us a little bit further, and we're talking here about some of the other, one of the good things is most people in Canada who do theological education have access to other denominations as part of their training. So that's good, but they're not always being trained for this particular kind of shared ministry, although they may be being trained to think ecumenically, which is important, right? In order to be able to move into this. So this takes us a little further down the road, and it isn't intended to terrify anyone or scare them off, but we want to be honest about what do people face when they go into shared ministry, and there are gifts to it, and then there are challenges. So we'll look at the next slide. Worship, and especially for Anglican and United churches, worship can be it can be a challenging thing to work out. Generally in shared ministries, there are sort of two options. One is the participating denominations do some kind of rotation. So I showed you the Turtle River Parish. In that parish, when the Anglican minister comes to town, or the Anglican priest comes to town, it will be an Anglican liturgy. And when the and when the United Church minister comes, it's a United Church ministry. So they have elaborate systems for setting up who goes where and when, and in a rotation. Some other places develop a combined or an ecumenical liturgy that's prepared for the shared ministry. And I think you heard a little bit about that too, that some places do, like Fernie, do a kind of a blended type liturgy. For Anglicans, if you have an Anglican partner, that has to be something that's approved, a liturgy that's approved by the bishop, because we'll talk in a minute about how oversight works of liturgy. What people talk about in shared ministry is that while it may seem strange at first to find themselves worshiping in a format that's unfamiliar, with a green book they've never seen before, and a blue hymnary that doesn't look like any of the blue hymnaries of the United Church, that can be strange at first, but most people say it's sort of like learning another language, and eventually they become bilingual in liturgy or biliturgical. They find they have a facility with both. They will always maybe have one way of worshiping that is that's important to them, but they learn the other language. They learn the richness of somebody else's worship life. So the next slide. So what generally happens for shared ministries to figure this out is you need to have some education with one another to say, and often, like I do it with like a chart and say, okay, what happens? Who decides what happens in worship in your tradition? And so you have to then know, in the United Church, who gets to make that decision? In the Anglican Church, who makes that decision? And generally in the Anglican Church of Canada, it's the diocesan bishop. So then, so you know that's where the structure of authority lies. But what would your denomination say was absolutely essential for any worship experience? And you see here that St. Mary's just started out using rotation and then developed a blended service over time, which is what happened at Windermere as well, in Windermere Windermere Valley. Yeah. So then you say, what has to be in worship? What has to be there for me to worship? And what should be there regularly, if not always? So you kind of start to build a picture of what each other needs in worship, including being honest about what is it that people really argue about in your tradition? Like, where are the sticking points for you folks? And just getting to know a little bit more about how people's worship life is structured in the other tradition is a really helpful way, even if what you're going to do is rotate your services. If there's a way to make an Anglican feel comfortable in a United Church service by making sure there's something there that is easy to make sure is there every week or on a more regular basis, then maybe that's a way to help build solidarity in your shared ministry. And likewise for Anglicans, although the liturgy is set, is there something you can do within that set liturgy that helps United Church people to feel like, oh yeah, that feels like home to me? So so people do work on that together, and I'm sure those of you who are in shared ministries would be able to talk about that, especially if you were part of some of the early formation of that. The next slide, please. So now we get to jump on those judicatories. What is it that challenges us about judicatories? And it's true that there can be some tension on both sides. So we're going to talk about a little bit. What do shared ministries say have been their problems or their challenges? And one is over caution. Like, are you sure you want to do this? Do you realize what that means for you? Do you know what the United Church says about certain things? And there's a kind of a fear of risk, that because judicatories have this interesting role in that they are responsible for carrying on the tradition of they hold the denomination's traditions in some ways, largely, right? They say we're responsible for seeing that the United Church of Canada stays true to itself, that the Anglican Church stays true to itself, and so that can sometimes make them too cautious, and people get frustrated that they're not sensing the openness. But the other thing, and Scott has pointed this out to me before, so is that they also, though, if you're adjudicatory, if you have that oversight role, then you also have responsibility for the unity of the church, right? And so judicatories also carry responsibility to care about Christian unity. But they don't always necessarily recognize that in their role. Sometimes they can be insensitive to the ecumenical differences being negotiated. And probably one of the biggest challenges you might meet in Anglican-United shared ministry is the issue of who can preside at communion and which communion. And so it's a big question, but it often it can become a bit contentious if people aren't kind of open to understanding the theologies of each group. And one of the resources we're going to point you to is a resource that the three of us, Andrew and Scott and I, all participated in creating as out of the Anglican-United Church dialogue. And part of it talks about shared ministries, and we sort of particularly think you'd find that interesting. But there's also a part that talks about this oversight question and how do we understand that, and especially what does it mean and who can preside at the table in shared ministry. So sometimes that can get unhappy if there's not a lot of generosity around that. And sometimes the judicatories I think it would really be simpler just to merge with your own denomination in some other community rather than to try to start that out. And we're hearing from Nipawa how they that it was essential to have Holy Eucharist, so they were able to make that happen in a way that was effective for their ministry. That's great to hear. Sometimes the judicatories, if they see some trouble, say, okay, see, it didn't work, and they dismantle it before there's a chance to try to really work things out. So those are just some problems that you can run into in shared ministry. The next slide tells us, though, that sometimes the judicatories say, you know, I do have a lot of issues here. And one of them is we always think of it as sort of like, if you think of shared ministry as getting married, and that is a bit of a, you know, you may not want to use that metaphor, but you can think about, you know, two people coming together to share, to maintain their independent lives and yet to be as one. Then they sometimes the parents think that the kids are rushing into things, right? So sometimes there's a concern that it looks like a good solution and people want to leap in before getting to know each other. Andrew talked a little bit about that. Boundaries, and I don't mean the kinds we often talk about around personal boundaries, although, I mean, I'm sure that can be an issue if it, but mainly the physical geographical boundaries of this massive country of Canada. And I've got there on the top map is a map of the regions of the United Church of Canada, and the bottom map is a map of all the all the dioceses in Canada, and you can see they don't all map neatly. And I just, yes, and that, so that question, keeping an identity, is also important. That's for sure. Yes, and so you know, so sometimes a united church might exist in a place that overlaps diocesan boundaries or vice versa. And so just sorting those things out can be complicated. It can be hard to find the right people to serve in shared ministry. You heard people discussing how much our clergy formed ecumenically, and you know, I have a heart for that, so I don't know that they're formed ecumenically enough generally, but you need people, and those of you who've been in shared ministries know how much you need people who are who have that openness, that sensitivity, that willingness to learn. They don't have to know everything about the other denomination, but they have to have a heart that's open to that, right? And so the judicatories can have trouble with trying to help congregations and parishes find the right people for them. And finally, sometimes with the overstretched work that everybody in the church does these days, shared ministry just seems like one more burden and can become, and that can be the message that some people get. And then the incumbent minister challenge of how you manage your time. Yes, usually when you get a group of people that serve in shared ministries together, clergy, the first thing they say is, do I have to go to the diocesan meeting and the regional council meeting? And do I have to be on this committee and on that one? And that's a big challenge to sort out for the clergy. That's right, for sure. So next slide offers a little more positive outlook. And that is to say, what can we do to help each other? Well, I mean, these are probably things you might have thought of. Cultivate a climate of open and mutual respect. And so it's kind of taking that deep breath and saying, no, we want to be in a place where we invite each other and not where we tell off each other, right? The next point, it may be helpful to think like a scientist. Scientists don't assume every experiment they do is going to turn out perfectly. They experiment to learn and to grow and to learn something new, right? So what if we say we're experimenting at being faithful Christian community together? This is new for us, and give us a chance to make a few mistakes as we go, but let's try an experiment. And then use the ties that you already have in the community to strengthen your partnership. So where there are already natural places of community, grow with that and go with that to some extent. And of course, we always have to, and this happens no matter how long you've been in shared ministry, we have to remind ourselves we are sharing our gifts. We're not competing to overtake each other. And so we're not trying to figure out who has the best liturgy or the finest program or the best way of talking about church, or faith, but what can we learn from one another? What can I learn from you? What is, we call this the ecumenical gift exchange. What can we share that will enrich our lives together as people of faith? And so those are just some things that can help us. So the next slide just invites us as we start to round up. Are there other questions or concerns or things that in this short time we haven't covered? I know it may not seem short to you, it does to us. Is there anything else that you'd like us to talk about, or that you would like to share that other participants should hear, just before we kind of wrap ourselves up? From a budget perspective, are there ever challenges repaying different salaries and different denominations pay scales, right? Yes, yeah. How is the compensation stipend for a minister who is serving in shared ministry? And it can vary. It tends to be the denomination that they're in that is the salary scale. So people are going to go looking for the cheapest denominations clergy. Right, that tends to be how it's worked out. But again, it can be worked out whatever you work out in your shared ministry agreement too. It can be sorted out that way. Yeah. Any other comments or thoughts? There's lots and lots to consider, and that's why we really are open to you getting in touch with us after the webinar. I'm happy to be in touch if you have, and to put you into, and if there's any of you that serve in shared ministries or live in shared ministries and would be interested in being a resource to other people, just if you could email me and let me know, or any one of us, and let us know. I think our emails have been shared or will be shared with you after the webinar, and we'd be happy to help you be in touch with people to help them, because nobody does it better than somebody who's already done it. So they can really be helpful in guiding the discussion. But we also do have some other resources too that we can share. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe then I'll move it over to Anne. Oh, would it be good to remind United Church folk about how the church has come about? People seem to have forgotten about it. Similarly, the Anglicans look back and see how they have changed. So some church history, well, you know, I'm a church historian, so I'm into that. Yeah. I mean, certainly for Anglicans to understand the three denominations that came together and the struggle for that to happen in 1925, sure. History is always good. And your local history is important to share with each other too. Yeah. And how do we manage conversations about theological or ethical difference while still minding our holy manners? Well, I guess many people could probably pitch into this, but and we'll come to Bruce's in just a second. What did we discuss at our first meeting? But what, well, the holy, you know, I guess just a couple of things come to mind. One is the problem, there is a problem of sort of assuming that our denominations are monolithic. And so so we need to understand that in both Anglican United Church, as in all churches, people have a range of views, right? And so don't come assuming you know what Anglicans believe about something, or that you know what the United Church believes because you heard something about somebody saying something once, right? So the best thing is that the holy manners means asking questions, right? What is it that you mean, you believe? And the
other thing I would say about that, Sandra, is that it isn't always necessary to come to agreement. So you can hold certain things in tension respectfully if they're not the most critical things to you. So you might just agree that you see, you know, you're going to see things differently on this one point.
The people that, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to further add that people from our churches have been formally tasked to have those kinds of conversations with one another for many, many decades now. And in fact, there are records of the way that they've talked about some of those traditionally divisive things, and maybe found that there's more common ground than they imagined, or found ways to understand unity within diversity more than they thought was there. So looking at some of those kinds of documents that even something like the Anglican-United Dialogue of Canada at the national level has produced, sometimes the things that you might worry about or the debated questions in your own local context, there's a document you could look at that could help you give some language and some things to explore and some new perspectives. So check those out on our church websites. They're there and they're helpful.
Yes. Yeah, and as Andrew says, you don't have to come up with a plan that includes everything you believe about every ethical issue that you're going to come up with against, right? So you might, and people that are in multiple denominations, shared ministries, they face that all the time, and they just see this church is a place where we come to be the community that worships together and loves one another and loves Jesus, and they recognize that may come from very different places. People come from very different places to do that. Yeah. So, and I just saw about Phyllis's father having been Phyllis's grandfather was the first principal of the United Theological Seminary in Montreal. So that's kind of neat. Again, history. Yeah.
There's a couple of questions on the chat about getting started, and I know that Andrew was addressing those earlier, but maybe Andrew, do you want to respond to those too?
Sure. Just to Kelly's question, Kelly was asking, does she understand correctly that we're recommending starting with events before considering any type of agreement and covenant? The short answer is yes. In the sense that it's easier to do small things first and see what the fit is and see and build the relationship, rather than sort of saying, well, let's start with, we're going to join together. That might be a little bit ambitious to start with. Could it work? Yeah, I suppose it could. I wouldn't say not to do it, but I think it's easier to start with smaller things first and sort of set a goal for this, for a year, we're going to do some small things together, see where we are, see how the relationship builds, learn about each other, and then we'll see where we get with an agreement or a covenant. And Bruce was asking at the first meeting, what would you suggest be discussed? For me, I would go back to what is our shared sense of mission? What do we want to do for God's glory in our community? And start there and see what you come up with. See what agreement you can come up with.
That comment about in the chat about sharing worship services, say in the summertime, or those are great ways to just kind of build in some sort of muscle memory about being together that can allow for the relationship to deepen too. Yeah.
One of the things that sometimes happens, going back partly to that question about how do we understand theological differences or polity differences, and those are real concerns. But one of the things I think that sometimes happens is when people from different churches begin to know each other and love each other and like being with each other and have some common history, then it creates a sort of almost an intellectual creativity and greater sense of openness to then revisit some of those things that might have been viewed as insurmountable problems. But then once you've known each other for a little while, you find, oh, actually, we could find a way forward on that. Or maybe that's not a big a deal as we thought it was before. So that's why those personal relational development things are an important part of this as building the foundation that then opens doors to things that you might not have thought were possible when you first started out.
And I think, and it's been said, I think numerous times, is to think of this as a journey, not as a destination. So there are lots of stages in the journey, and you might have ultimately, a certain destination in mind, but you might very well end up somewhere else together. And it's just being open to the leading of the Spirit, where is God leading you and your churches in your community, in your place, in your time? So I think we're
time to show the video.
Coming to an end. So
well, we
Steve,
have,
we have
the video, and then, yeah.
I've always been aware of the existence of ecumenical shared ministries, but have always understood them, even when I was an ecumenical officer at the national church level, understood them as a kind of last resort or some kind of stopgap or aberration that was to be kind of, tolerated because of circumstances. And I guess, now as somebody who's in leadership in a church that's living through whatever it is, our church is living through, the old order passing away and the, helping midwife, whatever the new thing is that's coming, recognizing that ecumenical shared ministries are not just some kind of provisional temporary thing, but are perhaps going to be a permanent part of the ecclesiastical and ecclesiological landscape for quite some time. And it's good to see that there's actually some or more and more scholarship being dedicated to them and engaging with ecumenical shared ministries theologically rather than just canonically or administratively or constitutionally. This is how we can make these things work, as opposed to what is distinctive about the ethos and the identity and the ecclesiology of these local communities. So I think that might also be a gift to the churches too, and those who think theologically about these things.
One of the gifts is the gift of creativity, of finding a new way to follow Jesus together and not just remain in our own denominational lanes or boxes, but be creative as God's calling in each local community context to figure out ways for the church to have a shared mission to follow Jesus together.
Becoming an ecumenical shared ministry forces, in some way, those communities of faith to get clear on their why and realize there's not actually so much difference. So it breaks down a lot of those barriers.
When you have someone else to dialogue with about worship or outreach into the community or whatever, then it brings in an element of possibility for change, more change, I think.
If we never hit bumps on the road, if we never were confronted by challenges or problems, then that would probably mean we're just doing everything on the surface. But, you know, with the Lutherans, for example, we are bumping into theological and sacramental and ecclesiological questions, and they're not insurmountable, but because we've been in this for 20 years now, we can have honest conversations about them and try and overcome them. So I think there's possibly lessons from another bilateral ecumenical relationship that the Anglicans have had that we can bring to the table of ecumenical shared ministries with the United Church of Canada, in the same way that the United Church's full communion relationships with, like, the United Church of Christ in the United States can maybe help inform our bilateral relationship here in Canada.
Great. I just want to lift up some wisdom that Jaff put in there, because it's really helpful, something that he was taught by Anglicans, and that is to focus on the essentials and not the non-essentials. Like, so much of our plans and desires can be ruined by being sidetracked on things that are, and arguing over things that really aren't the essential pieces to the puzzle. So focus on and determine for yourselves as a community, as United Church and Anglicans, what are the things that you need out of this, and hold out for those, and then let some of the other stuff go and fall where it may. So we've come to the end of our evening together. I want to say thank you for hanging in with us. There's a lot of wisdom here tonight, and I hope that those of you who have experience in doing this can share some of that with other folks. Thank you to my colleagues here for joining us and sharing.
We do
their
have
own
one more
wisdom.
slide there about
Yeah.
resources.
Okay.
Oh, you knew about that? Okay.
Yeah, I'm coming to it.
Okay, good. Okay.
We want to leave you with these two questions. What will you do now? And then how can we help? And by we mean the three of us, or our denominations. We can certainly put you in touch with people in the denomination who can help you with your plan for ecumenical shared worship. And you could put that in the chat. We can see them later, or you can just, we hope that you'll just dwell on these questions. Next slide, please. And finally, these are some resources. Scott mentioned earlier reports or reporting of Anglican-United Church dialogue. So the most recent iteration of that was completed in 2020, and there's a record of that. This one is particularly interesting because it struggled with episcopae and where we find authority in each of our churches. The Ecumenical Shared Ministries Handbook, we've already mentioned that. And then this lovely book by Sandra, who really is the expert on this. She's researched this a lot. And this is, she and some colleagues from the United States have this really fine book called Daring to Share. And you can get that, unfortunately, not through UCRDC, but which is the United Church Bookstore, but you can get it through Indigo or Amazon. That's where I got mine. So we hope that you'll take advantage of these resources and really dare to share. I mean, it's about daring, and it's about a willingness and a heart to share with your fellow Christian brothers and sisters. So thank you so much. We appreciate this time together.